We'll start it right. Thank you so much. And so my name is Julie Varughese, and I'm editor of Toward Freedom. And we are very happy to be hosting this event today called Breaking the Colonial Grip on African Journalism. We are hosting this event because one, today is the 32nd anniversary of Eritrea's independence, May 24th, as well as tomorrow is African Liberation Day. And as well as Toward Freedom is launching an Africa Reporting Fund, which we are going to use to enable us to raise the necessary resources to be able to produce more reports from Africa and about Africa. And so I would like to also say that that Toward Freedom has a long history of producing reports and independent coverage from Africa. It is an independent publication and continues to be an independent publication since 1952. It started out covering the anti-colonial movements, first in Africa and then later all around the world. And I would like to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Gnaka Lagoke, and our second panelist will be Erick Gavala. And so we'll start with Gnaka. Dr. Gnaka Lagoke is Assistant Professor of History and Pan-African Studies at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, and author of Laurent Gbagbo's Trial and the Indictment of the International Criminal Court, a Pan-African Victory. Gnaka, from what I understand, is also a longtime journalist in the Ivory Coast. So please welcome Gnaka.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you so much, people. I just want to thank Julie for a commitment to the cause of freedom and justice. And I just came this morning from a trip from Africa, and then I had already committed, to be here. So I was hoping that, I won't deal with a delay, but I was here on time. And it's going to be a nice conversation. It's not like I'm going to do a real PowerPoint, but I put a couple of stuff together, just to stress or reinforce some of the things that I'm going to say. I was a journalist back home in Ivory Coast when I was young, from 1991 to 1998. And then, of course, I could experience, like many people of my generation, what people used to call the African Spring Press. There was a transition from the one-party system to the multi-party system. And then the leaders of the opposition or opposition political parties were creating or created several news organizations in order to counter the media that were in force, which were promoting one side of the story or that neo-colonial agenda. And I was working in Gbagbo's newspaper, the former president of Ivory Coast. He was the leader of the opposition at that time. And then we somehow contributed, to the democratization of the freedom of press in Ivory Coast. Now, to talk about this conversation today, I want to put together something. Let me see if I can share that with everyone. Let me see if people can see that. Julie, okay, share screen. Okay, and then, yeah. And then if you can see it, that would be great. And then I think, okay. So yes, African freedom of press. So the first thing, in order for us to go quickly, I just wanted to talk about Kwame Nkrumah, who is here. We have a speaker here. Kwame Nkrumah was the first president of Ghana. He was a Pan-Africanist, and he contributed to advance the cause of freedom. And Ghana was the first to be independent in 1957. And so Ghana became the beacon of hope. Kwame Nkrumah's political party was the Convention of People's Party. Like him, many, all those who were fighting, they were creating their own media organizations. This is how they could mobilize the African masses. But here I put something Kwame Nkrumah said, which is in connection to our conversation. The forces arrayed against us are, and I use the words most carefully, formidable. They operate in worldwide combination at all levels: political, economic, military, cultural, educational, social, and trade, and not all through intelligence, cultural, and information services. So as we talk about freedom of press, I want to put emphasis on how neocolonialism, Kwame Nkrumah wrote a book on that in 1965, how neocolonialism are the forces that are working to oppress self-determination in Africa, how they control the content of the media that they do not control, or how they control the minds and the hearts of the people through the media, through Eurocentric media. Here there's a link, the Pan-African Media Portal. It was put together by the African Union. If you have an opportunity, you can go there and see. It gives you like a nice idea about the database of African media from A to Z. But when you go there, one thing that you're going to notice is that there are some media that you're not going to see them over there, even though it is a project put together by the African Union. As you know, we don't have enough time. Towards the end of my presentation, I may talk about that in a few. So, as Nkrumah was talking about how those forces that come against Africa, in the book that I put together, Laurent Gbagbo's trial and the indictment of the International Criminal Court, I have put together, inspired by the quotation of Kwame Nkrumah that I shared with you, what I call the wheel of imperialism, or what Kwame Nkrumah himself called collective colonialism. In one of his books and in several of his speeches, he was talking about how the collective colonialism that sometimes he had called neocolonialism, how it was more pernicious and more destructive to the African people than the colonialism that African people have experienced since the Berlin Conference. As you can see, in every sphere, here the one that is missing is Hollywood, the media aspect. That's the one that is missing. But the one I want to put emphasis on the left side of the screen in the middle, you see media propaganda tools. Before I came here to the United States, I had the feeling that, America was the place where, the freedom of press was guaranteed. When we were listening to those European media, we were thinking that, they were really there to share the information. But when there was a crisis, and when we noticed that the neo-colonial agenda was in crisis, we could see that BBC, First of America, RFI, which is Radio France International, France 24, the NY you see over this, NY is New York Times, the WP, Washington Post, all the media, as they were activated, instructed, they were going to say the same narrative, either to destroy the leaders who go against the will of imperialism, or those who want to express self-determination. So this is something that I wanted to share with you, which is in line with the conversation that we are having here. Okay, so here I think I put a lot of pictures here, but maybe that's the system that is that make you not see most of the leaders. But I had put on the PowerPoint the face of Nelson Mandela, who was considered a terrorist by the United States, even after he became president, even after he became free. Kwame Nkrumah, the gentleman here in blue, his name is Modibo Keïta, who was the first president of Mali, Pan-Africanist, advocate of non-alignment. And so, so either through the content, the media, the content they produce, They either do character assassination or physical or political elimination. Okay, yeah, so yeah, it's working out. This is Gave, Sekou Touré, the first to tell the French that he did not want to be a part of the Franco-African community, ostracized. The French took everything, from the country in order to destroy his spirit of what? Self-determination. Umnyombe, Cameroon assassinated. Félix Mumie from Cameroon assassinated. Patrice Lumumba presented, by the Western media as somebody who did not have strong moral qualities. The young gentleman over there, Sylvanus Olympio from Togo, Nelson Mandela in the middle. So let me go quickly, and then you can see Kwame Nkrumah on the left, on the right, Gaddafi, and then Gbagbo was the last one. If you have followed the news, when Gbagbo was in power and there was a crisis, everything that you cannot imagine was written about him, just in order to justify any humanitarian undertaking that the European wanted to do in order to break him, and they sent him to prison. He spent almost 10 years, like at the International Criminal Court. So now to finish today, what we want to see, something I wanted to say is that today in Africa, there is an awakening of the people. It's not just in Africa, but in the world. The Black Lives Matter movement in the United States here. Today in Mali, you can see people are organizing in order to resist against French neocolonialism. The CFA French campaign in the Francophone countries, the campaign of the economic freedom justice launched by Julius Malema in South Africa. And then in that context, you can see that Africans are trying to produce their own media. Here, I chose just this one, Ubuntu Radio, a better South Africa, a better Africa, and a better world. Ubuntu is a philosophy, it's an ideology, it's a value system promoted by Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki as they wanted to build a multiracial and multi-ethnic South Africa. And so in order to highlight the Ubuntu spirit, the South African put together what you can see here, the Ubuntu Radio. In Cameroon, there is a news organization called Afrique Media, which was at the forefront of the struggle for the liberation of Gbagbo. And then in Ghana, you have a Pan-African TV, which is created, which is also trying to promote Pan-Africanism. And as I finish, what I can say is that even though those media are trying, to show or to portray or to represent that a new awakening of the African masses, they should do more and better in terms of content production. And because there are so many things about the right, to freedom and the right to happiness of the African people that are not discussed in those respective media, which are still subject to the colonial barriers or to the respective linguistic divides. Thanks, Julie. I hope I did not do more than 10 minutes, and this is what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. I'm going to, you can just end your share. There you go. And thank you so much, Gnaka. That was excellent to lay the foundation about the situation of journalism in Africa. And so now let's move to Erick Gavala. And Erick is a news producer and media manager with over 10 years of expertise in leading news and media divisions across Africa. With a track record of producing local and international news and television features covering diverse topics such as breaking news, economics, energy, technology, politics, and human interest stories, he brings a wealth of experience to the table. He has spearheaded media teams across 38 African countries, ensuring seamless operations from pre-production to post-production while excelling in news sourcing and reporting. He is currently operations manager at African Stream, a Pan-African anti-imperialist digital media platform that produces cutting-edge content on all major social media platforms. Please join me in welcoming Erick.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie. It's a pleasure to join. As you've introduced me, my name is Erick Gavala. I work for African Stream, and working for African Stream is quite an experience. I've been able to, cover very many African countries, very many African stories. And before I get into much, I'd like to give a shout out to, African Stream CEO, Ahmed Kabelo. He wasn't able to attend, that's why I'm here in his stead. And I'll also include in that shout out any African Stream audiences out there watching us today. Well, so the other day, here in Nairobi, we covered a story which was basically talking about, how African Americans, or the proliferation of African Americans in trying to find out their ancestry, their African ancestry. And we did a guessing game whereby we just showed a photo, and then the team members here could be able to guess to find, where does PDD come from? Where does Drake come from? Where does Rihanna come from? And it was a fun game. But my point basically, even as we did that game, was that, all Africans are one people. And that's something which came out, during that. All Africans are one people, whether you're on the motherland or whether you're in the diaspora. We are all one people. And as we look at Africa today, these nationalities and these borders that we hold so dearly are becoming less and less important, because our Africanness is something which, has come out. Now, the African experience during colonialism, post-colonialism, and in the neo-colonialism, which is present today, the African experience has been of one story. There's very little differences here and there, but let me start from 1957 onwards. Ghana obviously was the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to get the independence. And in the 1960s, most of the African countries got the independence. And from there, most of the media houses were owned by the former colonizer. If it's Kenya or Nigeria, we know that the media houses there were owned by the British. If it's Ivory Coast, it was owned by the French. If you're talking about Mozambique or Angola, the media houses there are definitely owned by the Portuguese. If you're talking about Equatorial Guinea, the media houses there were owned by, the Spanish. So this stratification of Africa based on languages meant that the divisiveness was not just on the borders, but it also went to something much deeper, which is language. So moving on to the 70s and 80s, the ownership of these media houses changed, and most of them became government-owned media houses. Obviously, during that time, dissent or any form of opposition to the government of the day meant that the media house would have to be shut down or censored. Freedom just came the other day, I think the last 15 or 20 years, in covering Africa, as private media organizations, or what we call independent media organizations. That is something which has just started about 15 to 20 years ago, whereby now media houses, radio stations, newspapers could talk about some sensitive issues more openly. However, why are we here today? We're talking about breaking the grip of colonialism on media houses. And this obviously is things which I'd like to call that they are invincible to the naked eye, but they're very much present. Because when you look at something as simple as news sources or news agencies, the world leading news agencies, we have the Reuters, AFP, what other one? We have AP, we have Shutterstock, we have Getty Images. All of these are not owned by Africans. And the problem is when they produce their stories, for example, this morning I saw a story that has been put forward by AFP about Eritrea. And Julia, as we started, we mentioned that today is Eritrea's Independence Day. However, the distortion in the way the story has been covered, the angle in which they took, is that which is completely negative. It is not celebratory of anything. It is basically exalting the kind of repression that they've been talking about Eritrea for such a long time. So if Africans or if African journalists are to start having a mind that is free of colonialism, we have to have an African AFP. Give us an African Reuters, give us an African Shutterstock, give us an African Getty, so that it starts from the very beginning, whereby we can be able to disseminate to news or media houses information about Africa from an African perspective. Because we've seen what happens when that doesn't happen. The Reuters and the AFPs and the what have yous will basically just give you their own version, which is very neo-colonial. And, it's unfortunate, but sometimes African, not just African, but journalists throughout could be lazy. And that means you'll just regurgitate the information that you get there. So it's upon us basically to have independent news agencies that are African owned. That way we'll be able to start changing the narrative about Africa. One other point which I'll just touch on is the issue about African experts. We've seen many news reports whereby it's an African story and we have a European or a white expert. This is something which has sorely, been averse in the media space, whereby when you look at a flip and you're talking about an African issue and you have a white or a European expert, you don't have a reaction whereby someone is bewildered. But when we talk about a European issue with an African expert, people would know, come on, there's no way this African expert would say anything about Switzerland or Finland or the United States. But why is it that African issues, we have African journalists consulting European or foreign experts? So in doubt, we always have to think about consulting African experts. This goes a long way in showing that indeed the process of freeing ourselves from that mindset is taking root. I believe, Julie, that's my 10 minutes. I'll hand it over back to you.
Thank you so much. If anybody has any questions for both Erick and Gnaka about their presentations, please put them in the chat and we will address them accordingly. But I have a question, and it's, you were mentioning it's important, Erick, you were mentioning it's important to have African voices that are telling African stories. But some African voices are like Barack Obama, where they serve capitalist power. And what would you then say, what then is required, you would say, to ensure that it's people's voices and not the colonialists' voices?
Very good question, Julie. Well, we've all deconstructed, Barack Obama on our various channels. On African Stream, I know we have. It was during his tenure that Libya, got into the mess that it's in. Gaddafi was not just uprooted or ousted, but he was also killed. And we know that Libya has never recovered. Since I think 2020, they've been trying to hold elections, and we've had this back and forth. They've still not been able to do so. So I would say that in order for us to have a discerning voice and not just listen to neo-colonial stooges that have been put there by colonialists or people who are seen as liberal colonialists, is to have Africans or African channels or African journalists that not just deconstruct the neo-colonial agenda, but also put into context any information that comes from a so-called African intellectual. The other day we spoke about on African Stream, there's this video whereby an African sister is basically talking about colonialism and saying that Africans should give it a rest, should stop blaming colonialism for the problems that we have in Africa today. Yeah. Now, this obviously is a fallacy because we cannot speak intelligently about Africa without looking at its history. And the lady in that video was basically saying that Singapore is a colony, or is a former colony, that is now richer than the UK, which colonized it. But now when you look at African countries, the situation in Africa is very different because, for example, 14 African countries have their bank reserves in France. Singapore doesn't have that. We have countries in Africa where they are still being pillaged by neo-colonial companies like Arriva in Niger, which is giving the country of Niger about 4% royalties, still pillaging the country. And such stuff is basically because this new wave of African intellectuals being given platforms by white people or by white racists to say things that they themselves want to say but cannot say. So we have to be very discerning in such instances and not just take information because this is an African. We have to look at information at its context and analyze the information and spread that information to other Africans so that they are able to understand what's what.
You're muted.
You're muted.
I'm sorry. So Gnaka, I was wondering if you would like to comment on the same question regarding African voices and African media.
So that's for me. I commend Erick for his presentations. When he was talking about African voices, I wanted to react. For me, the problem is it's a little bit bigger. That's why I showed that wheel of imperialism. For me, everything that we go through, from slavery through colonialism to neo-colonialism, it is the same thing. The structure that you saw, you can use the same structure during slavery, during colonialism. You're going to see similar, I will not say identical, but similar structures put into place by the European to dominate. So, but the European they're very strong, and then they do everything they can to continue their domination over non-white people. And we have to know that. And then as we know that, we have also to take into account that they use different types of techniques in order to continue the Eurocentric neo-colonial agenda. Now, and he said it, I said that a little bit, Africans are trying. They are trying, believe it or not, Africans are trying to be free. I was a journalist. I said that in the beginning, for 8 years, we in Ivory Coast produced content, to contribute to the freedom of press in Ivory Coast. In the age of the multi-party system, different news organizations were created in different African countries. But one thing that was lacking, that we see that people are trying to rectify today in the news organization that they are creating, but then still it is not sufficient. It was the lack of a strong Pan-African consciousness in the 90s. And then today, that's why I was talking about, the awakening of the masses, the Black Lives Matter movement here, when people protested and they destroy the statues of white supremacy. The roads must fall in South Africa. Things are happening. But one of the problems of Africans is that beyond the laziness that Erick was talking about, we are not sufficiently organized. You can have African writers you can have African AFP, you can have African Washington Post. But there's one thing that the Europeans do that many African news organizations are not doing. They work in coordination. When there is like a press release, a press document that is produced, they make sure that that information is disseminated throughout the globe. You heard about the Panama Papers. The news organization that produced the Panama paper, they came together, they agreed on when to share the information and how to share the information. But in Africa, we have not reached that level of organization in the field of the media. I am seeing you today, and then you are discovering me today. Of course, you cannot know all the Africans who are doing the work, but there's one thing that the African media should do. They should go and do research online to see. I see a brother here, like an Afro-American, great man, great scholar. But I want to see African news organization reaching out to those people. Dr. Jibo Sobukwe is here. I think I also see, Jemima Pierre, like wonderful, I think it's the same person, wonderful Haitian lady, great scholar. You guys should be doing all the things to reach out so that themes and topics like common to the awakening of the African people should be discussed in the news organization. One of those things can be what? Reparations. It's a strong topic in the United States, but barely people talk about that in Africa, and it's just not correct. So I came from Togo. They want to launch the Pan-African Congress in 2024. I was a journalist, but I am not strong enough to do what I'm talking about whenever I can. That's why I'm here in Julie's panel. Like I said, I landed this morning at 9. In Africa, as you seem to be a very important voice in the African media, please meet your people, reach out to the Black American, reach out to the Caribbean, and find on earth the right Africans so that we can see that there is a synergy, like in the struggle, for a better freedom of press in Africa. So for me, it's a problem of organization and how to disseminate. We don't even have to go and invent the wheel. We just have to copy what the Europeans are doing, but in the name of a rising Pan-African consciousness.
Okay, thank you. And Eric, do you want to comment or respond?
Yes, please, if I may. Fantastic. Very, very well said, Professor Gnaka. I just want to add something about, on what you've said about coordination, which is very important. I think that's something which is sorely missing. We've had a situation when you look at the media space in Africa today, many stations, do their local news. And then when they go to the next segment, which is now international news, they now regurgitate what comes from the BBCs and the CNNs and what have you. So we have a lacking when it comes to coordinating. There's no regional news. Someone in Togo, for example, will he or she care about a story happening in Kenya? Or someone in Namibia, will they care about a story happening in Mauritania, for example? Because there's that lack of coordination. You find that people we are really trying, like I said, we're trying to look outward, but still these borders are keeping us, our minds looking inwards, whereby we have to look outwards when it comes to the African context. So like, for example, there's France 24 were kicked out of Burkina Faso. And we saw that, France 24 and the other European media houses reporting that Burkina Faso is lacking in press freedom. However, because there is lack of context in the way many of these organizations report these stories, we never got to understand why the France 24 were kicked out. But the truth is they were kicked out because they interviewed an extremist, a top extremist on the station. And when they were kicked out, it was because of that reason and not just because Burkina Faso lacks, media freedom. So if that single story is told by African media outlets, then that one voice is carried out across the globe. And the single narrative is that African countries will not support Western countries that want to also give extremists or separatists a voice. So coordination is very important.
Julie, if there's not a question, I would like to say something. If there's a question, then I can wait.
We have some questions.
Okay.
Maybe you can answer through that response. One person here, Salifu, who is a part of the All African People's Revolutionary Party and Low Country Action in Charleston, South Carolina, and the Black Alliance for Peace, and is one of the editors of Hood Communist, which is a blog. And he's asking, how should serious Pan-Africanist news sources be looking to deal with the bloodthirsty demand of Western audiences demanding negative coverage of the presence of China in Africa? Who wants to take that question?
I'm not sure if I understood. Maybe Eric, you can start and then I can.
Sure, I'll take that. Well, basically, let me start addressing that question with a scenario, something which happened over the past 2-3 years, I believe. And this is the singular story that has been coming from Western media outlets about the China debt trap. We've been warned again and again about the Chinese and why they've come to Africa, and their ulterior motives is not just about development and bridging the infrastructure gap. And the story that Western media outlets ran with was Sri Lanka. The port that they defaulted on a loan, and China came in and took the port. In Uganda, we had examples of the airport in Entebbe that has been taken over by the Chinese because they defaulted on a loan. Again, in Kenya, we had the same narrative, and Professor Gnaka is very correct. The coordination of this was very seamless. Mombasa, the Mombasa port, it was reported that it was taken up by the Chinese because of Kenya defaulting on a loan. So when you interrogate these stories, you do some research and you go into the finer details, you find out that was basically a lie. And it was told so in a very coordinated manner. And this is something which I usually say, that propaganda from Western media outlets is so sharp and so acute that you have to be very, very careful to be able to distinguish between the facts and the lies and the half-truths. So we took apart the story, looked at at its core, and even had someone in Uganda say that the airport is still owned by Uganda. The Mombasa port is still owned by Kenya, and this is just a story that is being put out to discredit China because, well, they have overtaken the United States and other traditional trading partners in Africa. So these kind of stories, they've been going viral in the West because I think the competition that China has brought in Africa, whereby they don't tie their infrastructure deals to demands, it's something new, and it's something which the West had not anticipated, because we all know how they've been dealing with Africa when it comes to negotiating infrastructure projects. So this is something which has to be called out. And African Stream, or organizations like African Stream, have been trying to do that. We've had individuals who do blogs or vlogs and write on their own small way, but we need corporates or corporations that operate in the level of BBCs and CNNs and what have you, to be able to debunk the myths that have been told by these Western media outlets. So even though there's a hunger for this information, there has to be a voice of reason that Africans or African media and African journalists, even editorially, we have to be able to put concerted efforts and make sure that these myths are debunked and put forward the right or the correct story.
Thank you. And so there's another question here, a couple of questions that are very similar which is one is a journalist from Burundi named Desire Nimubona, and they say that in Burundi and the Democratic Republic of Congo, media has been working with European and American US projects or funds. This blocks us from challenging the EU, USA rhetoric in Africa because they are using their money, and there are a lot of ways to control the media in Africa. And then Alvin Jah asked, how strong is the US State Department's Young African Leaders program in promoting a pro-imperialist agenda in African media?
Yeah. Okay. So let me try on these questions. So Eric, your answer, to the last question was beautiful, right? So, and so it's the same thing that we are dealing with. It's about the European willing to maintain the domination, like over the world, and then like from century to century. And now, how do we resist? And I spoke about the importance of coordination. But there's one thing that is happening that I forgot to talk about, and even Erick himself. It is the importance of the social media. Yes, the importance of the social media, I see that as a favorable historical factor to help in the debunking of the European myths and the half-truths and the lies they're putting out there. That is the first thing that I wanted to say. The second, yes, the two of us, we spoke about the linguistic divides, and we spoke about the border issues in the beginning, but what internet is bringing to the conversation is that internet is contributing in the consolidation of the Pan-African consciousness. And then when we saw the revolution in Sudan, when we saw that young lady was standing and then talking about freedom, and then people think that what she was doing, it was similar to the Gnaka, those Nubian, during the Nubian civilization. And then when you see, for instance, the Ugandan boy, I always forgot his name, Bobby Wine. When Bobby Wine is having an issue, for instance, with Museveni, because the youth of Africa is tired of the oppressive regimes of in many African countries. You can see people in different parts of Africa sympathizing with Bobby Wine, even though Bobby Wine himself is reluctant to embrace Pan-Africanism, but because they see him as a symbol of resistance. And now, of course, one of the things that because of the work that we do, the Europeans are very, very serious. If there is one thing I admire in the Europeans, they mean business. And I know many of the people who are listening are brilliant people. What I'm going to say is not new to them. But so people have to see why, for instance, Joe Biden can go to Hiroshima and then say something about the 100,000 casualties that Russia lost in Bakhmut. And in the same sentence, he say, oh, there were 20,000 killed. So if people do not pay attention, they're going to say, you know what? Russia, they lost 100,000 people just in Bakhmut. And then they do all those things. Of course, like the brother Ajamu was talking about, the young African leaders, the Americans are doing that. The French are doing the same thing in the Francophone countries, enticing young African leaders, creating institutions so that they can instill and disseminate their culture in the minds and the hearts of those Africans who may want to think about the importance of self-determination in Africa. They are doing all those things. That's why if we want to survive, if we want to put out there what we think is true and which is important for the self-determination in Africa, we need to know, first thing, to know how those media and how state actors of the European countries, how they function, how they use the media, so that we make have a better way of dealing with them. So this is one thing that I wanted to add, to the conversation.
Thank you. And Eric, do you have anything to regarding this question that was raised about foreign states funding journalism or programs for young people in Africa?
Yes. First, I'll handle it in two ways. Number one is social media. We've spoken about social media, and this is a game changer in the media space, because it equalizes the people who have a voice. Before, we just had corporations and governments who could be able to communicate to people, or to large masses of people. Now social media puts the power to the hand of individuals, and I think this is something which is working beautifully in Africa, especially because we now have about 60% penetration of the internet. And with the young population, we have a median age of about 19 years old. I think the revolutionary Pan-Africanism is taking place on Twitter, on TikTok, on Instagram, and all of these places where it was so hard to get this information about the history and the moves that Africans are taking across the world. Now it's just on your hand. You can do it on your mobile phone, on your laptop. So I believe the game changer in this would be social media. So that, because the difference in the investments that can be put in funding these media houses, of course, I'm sure Europe or the EU can come in and say they want to plunge 10 billion euros into a project of African media. But one great equalizer, like I said, is social media. Now, the other point which I'd like to make is we have African or well-to-do Africans, or African millionaires, African billionaires, who basically can come through and put in investment in African journalists, African-owned media houses, and basically have from top to bottom, from the watchman all the way to the CEO, to be African, so that we are not just used as mouthpieces, like the sister I talked about before, who basically carries the message of the white supremacists and say the things that they cannot say, but they say it through her because she's African. So it is said that he who funds you, he who gives you money or gives you aid, owns you. So I believe if these African millionaires, African billionaires can put money into these kind of projects, we're going to have a credible African voice that is authentically African and providing African context to the global issues that affect the continent.
Both of you raised the power of social media on the continent. In the United States and around the world, there's been a lot of suppression of people using social media to raise dissent, to raise their voice around different issues, like Palestinians who have been banned off of Twitter, Instagram, Venezuelans similarly. Also, the practice of silencing or muffling hashtags or certain words on Twitter, so that if you're using that hashtag and you're trying to make it go viral, then because it's going against the mainly the US state, and because all these different social media platforms are very interlinked with the US state, the US government, it's and all of those connections have been made through other investigations done by other journalists. So what do you, you're saying that social media has been a game changer on the African continent, but at some point, maybe it won't be, because the same suppression might be used if it hasn't already been used in Africa. At that point, what is the game plan, you think?
Okay, I want to start with, because when you started the question, I was writing, I was expecting, the way you ended it. So, yes, of course, even though we talk about social media, again, they were the ones who invented those social media. And then we are taking advantage, to reduce the oppression of the power over our lives, but they are still the ones who control them. Elon Musk just bought Twitter, and he has a different approach, but still, we know one day I posted, when George Floyd was killed, murdered by that white racist police officer, a picture which circulated on like in the media. I received a notification from Facebook saying that it was some gruesome, or it was against the copyright, something like that. And so they blocked the picture. It's the same picture because they don't want many people. I know today, if you want to go and show the picture of Emmett Till when he was killed, certainly Facebook is going to say, you cannot show that, because they want to control the way they want to control the information that we're going to share on the social media. So we understand that. But because the reason why they have some difficulties to control everything that is done on social media, it is because there is a bigger number of people willing to do the same thing, or willing to express their freedoms in the way they disseminate the information. That's the reason why they're having some difficulties. But so what does it mean? Even though the social media are important, there are a couple of things that I want to suggest as methods for a better expression of freedoms. The first one is education. We have to educate ourselves. We have great professors. We have great people. I mentioned a couple of names here. They are there. As an African, I would love to see Africans who have the media. I want to see them reaching out, to those people. And of course, here we can understand that many of them, I'm talking about many Black Americans, may not do the same thing towards Africans, but there are people here who are doing that. The struggle that I've been, everything that I'm doing here, I had the support of Europeans, some white Americans, and many Black Americans, and they are there. So we need to have like a two-way conversation, a two-way reach out, so that we can try to know more about each other. That is the first thing. As we talk about education, one thing that we need to do is to know, I spoke about that, to know how the European functions, so that we can see how we can counter them. Third element is about the Pan-African consciousness. I am sorry, there are many people who talk about Pan-Africanism, but they don't know Pan-Africanism. And there are some people who are there and who know Pan-Africanism. There should be the one who should be elevated to teach Pan-Africanism in order to consolidate the Pan-African consciousness. The other element that we need to do is about promoting our models. We have so many role models that we don't even see the media talking about them. I know you may have heard about Nigerians, that they are the greatest crooks on earth. The Nigerians are not trustworthy people. But guess what? In West Africa, the revolution of the banking system was led and conducted by the Nigerians. That is a beautiful story that you cannot even see in the media. And that story needs to be told. Aliko Dangote, called the richest Black man on earth. I saw one day he was being interviewed on Al Jazeera. And then even though the lady gave him the opportunity to speak, and she was asking him the following question. Oh yes, people say that, you became rich, because of your connections with some corrupt leaders. Why have you seen somebody becoming rich and without having connection with corrupt leaders in the United States or in France or in any place of the world? But because he's Black and he's African, therefore his wealth it has to be tainted, or there should be a stain on his wealth. So there is another guy in Togo. His name is Gonjo Gervais. He was the one who launched Eco Bank in West Africa. And as you can see, these African airlines are suffering beside Ethiopian Airlines and Egypt Air. The guy launched one called Askai Airlines. How many Africans know about Gonjo Gervais? So many stories are there. When we should not be caught in the trap of doing buzz or talking about the media in order to sell. So many of the African journalists, they're caught in that trap. So we need to deconstruct the way we disseminate information. We need to put more light on those who are doing the right thing. So these are all the things that we need to do. And I'm going to end on that. If I'm going to end on that. We need to find a way to put together a stronger coordination of the African media so that they can work in coordination on some specific common themes and topics for the rise of a stronger Pan-African consciousness.
Thank you so much, Gnaka. And I failed to say that this is the final question we can take because we are at time, but we do want to hear from Erick on the same question about the social media corporate control.
Yeah, very well explained, Professor Gnaka. On this, I'd say, currently, Africa is neither looking east nor west. We are basically looking at the partners with which we can work with that benefit the interest of Africans. So even as China has become the largest trading partner in Africa, and there's all of these infrastructure projects popping up left, right, and center. We have the Maputo Bridge, we have the SGR in Kenya, another one in Ethiopia, we have the port in Djibouti, we have so many infrastructure projects. But the important thing that is happening is the skills transfer. And this is something which people don't talk about. As we are dealing with China in the meantime, we're looking at the prospect of working with them in the meantime and then increase our capacity to be able to do it ourselves. And I would extrapolate that to social media. In the meantime, because it is said that necessity is the mother of invention. In the meantime, as we use these social media platforms that are owned by Western or European companies, we can use them, but start working on African-owned social media platforms. Because the best way of going about it is to look at what problem is there in Africa. We already know that we have a lot of Pan-African content that we'd like to put out. However, given the risk that you can be shut out or you can be closed down, what can we do in the meantime? Work on the platforms that are there now, and in the meantime, continue investing and propping up other African-owned social media platforms so that in any case we are taken out, we can always revert and bring the 1.4 billion population to the African-owned platforms.
Thank you so much. Thank you both, Gnaka and Erick Gavala, for your contributions, your insight into breaking the colonial grip on African journalism. It's been very nice to hear from both of you and our audience in the unfortunately, the chat wasn't open because of a setting that was not set up. We're very sorry about that, but we really appreciated everyone's questions, which were very well thought out and considerate. So the recording of this will be posted very soon on Toward Freedom's platforms, and we will alert everybody once that happens through social media and the email blasts and on our website. And again, thank you so much to Gnaka and to Erick. Again, this online panel discussion was put on to help launch the Africa Reporting Fund so that Toward Freedom can obtain the resources to publish more reports from Africa and about Africa. Because we've been wanting to ramp up our coverage of Africa to get back to our original purpose, which started in 1952 of covering the anti-colonial struggles in Africa. So thank you again. If anybody would be interested in supporting this work through the Africa Reporting Fund, you can go to towardfreedom.org/donate. That's towardfreedom.org/donate. And I cannot put that in the chat for you, but You can find us online also at towardfreedom.org as well to look at our coverage of Africa and other places around the world. And that is it for now. Thank you so much to both of you.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.